Hello, I'm here. Once again, failed at the clean start. I promise one day I will have a clean start to live stream. One day it'll happen. I was all set up today. I was all set up to go. And yeah, I was all set up to go. Everything's going fine. And before I start live stream, I reboot my computer to make sure I had the best internet connection possible. And when I did, it went to a lower network. I have a 5G and a 2G network in my home, and it went to the 2G. And so anyway, whatever. Hi, how are you? I hope you're having a wonderful Sunday. Hope you're having a great weekend. As always, if my audio is too loud or too soft, please comment in the box so that I know that there is an issue and I can work on fixing that. Once again, I have my coffee for Knit Tea Live. Let's see. I see I have 4 concurrent viewers. You gonna say hi? Oh, hello, Samantha. Hello. Good to see you. I hope you're having a wonderful Sunday. I'm like checking my latency and stuff right now, so making sure everything's okay. Just waiting for, hi, Bear, Crochet Critters. Welcome back. Glad you made it this weekend. Hey there. May you have no more issues. Well, I think people will argue that I will always have issues personally, but hopefully no more technical issues. Let's hope for that. But hey, this is better than last week. You missed it, Bear. Last weekend on the start, I switched my webcam from my computer to my iPhone, and just as live stream started, alerts started coming through my phone and popping up in the live stream, and couldn't fix it. It was, oh, but you watched the playback, so you probably know. Hey, Whitney, good to see you again. Bear and Char Designs, hello, welcome. Thank you all for joining me this Sunday. Very excited, as always. I'm excitable. But yeah, this week I figured out my iPhone situation. You will not be getting insights into alerts as we live stream. At least we shouldn't, because I turned off, because as we've learned, do not disturb is useless. So I put on airplane mode. I turned off Wi-Fi connection with my phone. Like, I don't see how the outside world can possibly get through my iPhone this week for a live stream. So we should be good. Hi, Claudia. Good morning. Good morning to you. So I'll be honest, because I am determined not to talk about the site that I will not be talking about, Ravelry. I've kind of sat there, I'm like, what are we going to talk about on this live stream? So I do have one thing that's sort of Ravelry adjacent that happened on Twitter earlier this weekend, and I'm going to leave it up to you guys if you want to hear about it. It involves, if you follow me on Twitter, you may be aware what went down with a person who might be starting a pattern sales site called Yarn Room. If you want to hear about that, let me know in chat and we can talk about it. And if you're like, no, thank you, not interested in yarn drama, I understand, and we will just not talk about it. I did blog about what happened, so you can always check my blog for details, but it was so weird. It was so crazy. Part of me is like, it's like, it was so strange. Anyway, so what to start with for this live stream? I think I'm going to start with the preview. Hey, Whitney, I would like to hear about it if you don't mind. I don't mind at all talking about it because it's so crazy. I would love to hear other people's opinion about it. So I'm curious now. Oh, good. I sold it to all y'all. See what I did there? I sold you the tail. All right. So we will talk about it. I'm going to just wait a couple, like one more minute to see if anybody else shows up. While we'll do that, I will catch you up on things I've been up to for the channel. So, look what I got busted out. If you remember these, let's see. I gotta get something set up real quick. I stream. Do this one. Okay, so these, if you remember, if you recall, I am going to be doing a review. These are the Addi Flexi Flips. I did bust these out. I did start using them. And where is it? There it is. And I made this weekend utilizing these. If you follow me on Instagram, you saw the very beginning of the cuff of this. I finished this late last night. So I have utilized the Addi Flexi Flips. I have definite thoughts about it. Oh, and I was even really good. I even weaved in all my ends as soon as I finished the glove. So I might actually finish this before the end of the year. But anyway, I love this pattern, by the way. This is called Honeycomb slip stitch. It's a slip stitch pattern. I absolutely love this pattern, and I make various forms of this fingerless glove using this slip stitch pattern. I don't have my previous projects. This is one of the few projects that I do more than once, but I love this. But so yeah, so that review should be coming probably not this coming week, but next week. So after next live stream, I will probably have the review of these needles up, because I think I've tested them enough that I know my thoughts on them. And yeah, Bear crochet, it looks like scales too. Yes, it does. And in fact, what inspired me to do this glove and this stitch pattern was I was watching Aquaman, and I'm in love with mermaids. I have been my entire life, and I thought I would really like to have a pair of fingerless gloves that looked like fish scales, so I could pretend to be a mermaid. So I call these Mira. I call this glove pattern Mira. This is the short version. I have a long version of it as well. These are bigger needles than I normally do them on, but yes, fish scales, mermaids was the inspiration for this glove. So yeah, these I'm going to be, I'm just switching my camera around. There we go. So yeah, I'm going to be having the review of these up, like I said, not this week, but the week after, I believe. So I have some definite thoughts about them. And I did start the second glove, but I'm doing the second glove on 2 circular needles just to kind of compare my feelings about working with the Addi Flexi Flips versus a method that I really enjoy using, that I enjoyed using previously. I would also try doing the glove on DPNs, but I've done these gloves on DPN, so I know my thoughts on that. I need to get the long version. Oh, okay. Well, I could type up, do I have it with me? I don't have my pattern book that pattern is in, but I have, speaking of fish scales, I have this pattern book, and these are my notebooks that I write up my stuff in as I'm making up patterns, and this is like what my book looks like as and the notations are all just kind of my own sort of make sense to me notation, so I have to actually translate it into like universal knitter speak and not just my own knitter speak. But yes, I could write up that pattern. It's a very easy pattern. I love slip stitch patterns generally because slip stitch patterns are the kind of patterns that are just stunning to look at, and they are so easy to do. Like, if you can slip a stitch, you can do slip stitch patterns. They're not that complicated. They're really beginner friendly. It's the kind of technique that if you're a beginner and you tackle it, you just start feeling yourself real well as a knitter. Like, you start going, okay, I can do this. I can do things that look challenging because maybe it's not as challenging as I thought it was. Whitney, can't wait for the video. Bear, when you ever get around to it, I would very much appreciate it. I have notes like that too. Yeah. I know. It's like, I am, because I was asked last weekend about software that I use for when I'm doing patterns and such, and I never really have, but and it's so odd for me because I'm normally a very digital person where I'm like, I like using my technology to keep myself organized. I'm not actually great at organizing physical space. I can organize virtual space pretty well, but physical, like real world space, if you saw what the rest of my craft room looked like this back here, that's all an illusion. This all looks nice and clean. It's an illusion. This is a lie. I'm lying to you. If you saw the rest of my craft room, it's chaos. But I feel comfortable in the chaos. Like, I do. Samantha, I appreciate that you shared a non-curated Instagram perfect view into your creative process. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I ain't got time to be making, like, my knitting work look fancier than it is. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I get it, like professional designers, they need to show off their designs to the best effect they possibly can. I get it, and Instagram is marketing for their designs. That's what they need to do. Whereas me, I mean, I am marketing myself now on Instagram because I'm doing YouTube, but what I'm doing is different. Like you said, I'm giving a peek more into my crafting life as opposed to trying to like sell some dream vision of work. So it's just a different point of view that I come to with all of it. Plus, like I said, I barely have time. I don't have time to like F around too much with my photos, you know? I'm lucky that I remember to snap the photos, truth be told. So the other thing I wanted to share with y'all, the other preview that I'm going to give has to do with, this is a longer, what I would categorize more as a epic review that I'm doing, which has to do with affordable acrylic yarn. And it's funny because I started this idea and working on this review before the whole conversation came up about affordability and accessibility, and it was just one of those moments where the universe came together. But I did do my first swatches, and I wanted to show this to you guys because it's not going to give anything away in terms of the review, but it brought up something that I think is really difficult to deal with for knitters, which is yarn companies misleading us, right? So this here is swatches. Let me zoom in a little so that you can see it just a little bit better, maybe. These, focus, there we go. These are swatches of the Lion Brand's Basic Stitch. I always have to make sure I'm saying that correctly because I want to say Basic Bitch, but this is their Basic Stitch acrylic yarn. And this is their base level, least expensive yarn. And according to Lion Brand, they say this is a size 4, that their Basic Stitch is a 4 medium worsted weighted yarn. And I'm doing this off the top of my head, so I'd have to double check. But they put the gauge on a size 8 needle, and I believe it's 18 stitches per 4 inches on a size 8 needle. Okay? So I went to go swatch it. And I'm going to go back to this camera. This is the first swatch I did using the size 8 needle. This came out to about 19 stitches per inch, right? Here you can see the fabric. Now this is not washed and blocked, so that's not a, going to be a completely accurate gauge yet. So this is, but just off the needles, this came out to 19 stitches per inch. I cannot imagine going up a needle size to get to 18 stitches per inch with this yarn. This already looks like it's on the verge of being too loose to me, right? And if you watched, I think my first or second live stream, I did the wraps per inch for this yarn, and it was a 12 wraps per inch, which rates that at a DK weight. So I'm like, how is Lion Brand calling this yarn worsted weighted yarn? And I just imagine knitters, if you're trying to use this yarn for a substitution, I feel like you would drive yourself crazy trying to reach gauge and have a satisfactory fabric. If the design of the object, you know, is kind of going for that very middle of the road, average worsted weighted gauge for the project, because design gauge, pattern gauge, and the gauge you find on a ball band aren't like completely related. It's one of those weird conventions in knitting where, at least in the United States, many companies, and I learned this because I'm getting ahead of myself, but anyway, yarn companies, a lot of times the way they determine gauge for their yarn is they produce the yarn, they give it to a pool of crafters, knitters and crocheters who work up swatches. Then the yarn company measures those swatches and comes up with an average, and then they call that their gauge that ends up on the ball band. And then based on that gauge, they say, okay, this is a worsted weighted yarn. This is a DK weighted yarn. And they use the Craft Yarn Council of America's chart to determine that. And I'm sitting here looking at this going, what did you tell your pool of crafters to do to decide that this was worsted weight? Because I'm sorry, this is not a worsted weighted yarn. Oh, thank you, Bear. She said, I love that you're doing a deep dive into affordable yarns. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. And look, I'm not a yarn snob. You know, I love working with natural fibers. I mean, that's my first choice generally. It depends on the project. I make baby blankets for my friends and family when people, you know, have a bundle of joy on the way. My thing is to make a baby blanket for them. And acrylic makes sense for that type of project. So yeah, I'm going to use acrylic, and I'm pretty unashamed of that. I'm not a yarn snob. And people need to know what their affordable options are. And, you know, the thing is, I would say 30, 40 years ago, maybe even just 20 years ago, acrylic yarn, the quality of it wasn't fantastic. A lot of it on the market wasn't fantastic, but acrylic yarn has come a long way. I think if all you're concerned about is quality and affordability, you can get really good, satisfying acrylic yarn. If your issue in terms of acrylic yarn are based more in environmental issues, well, that's a whole other topic, right? But, you know, for some crafters, like, acrylic is what they can afford. And there's no reason that we shouldn't, like, you know, let people know, okay, if this is what you can use, here are some really good options for you. So that's my feeling. That's kind of like why I was wanting to do, especially in these times. I mean, the times we're living in right now, people need options. We all need options. So anyway, I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more in terms of manufacturers misleading us with their ball band information. Have you run into that type of situation where you got a yarn and they're like, yeah, it's a worsted weighted yarn, and then you're like working with it and you're like, this makes no sense. This yarn, there is no way this is a worsted weighted yarn. Because, and I think it's one of those things that makes yarn subbing really difficult, especially for newer knitters who aren't as versed in all of this stuff around gauge and ball band. I mean, so many new knitters coming to knitting, they feel like they're not doing something correctly if they look at a pattern and they say the recommended needle size is size 7 and you're supposed to get a certain gauge, and then they use the size 7 needle and they don't get that gauge, They think they're doing something wrong with their knitting, where it's like, no, there's nothing wrong with your knitting. You're just a looser or tighter knitter, just change your needle size. And they don't know yet that it's just a jumping off point, that recommended needle in a pattern. They don't know, looking at a ball band, what that gauge information is supposed to be telling them and what they're supposed to be doing with that information. And then to add on top of it misleading information, yikes, yikes. Bear, Karen Simply Soft is more than 3-side and 4, and I learned that the hard way. Yeah, and I really like Karen Simply Soft. I use that quite a bit for stuffed animals and, you know, toys, because it is so soft. But yeah, I mean, the gauge on the ball band is, no, I don't buy it. Baron Designs, worsted and fingering seem to have the greatest variety in accuracy and weight in my experience. Yeah, and I mean, I think some of that has to do with the fact that, I mean, at least in terms of Yarn Council, Craft Yarn Council, I mean, if you look at the chart, every weight, there is a range. And do I have my card with me? I know I do. Here it is. If you look at the card, this has the Yarn Council of America's information on it, and like worsted weight, 9 to 11, oh no, that's the WPI gauge per inch. 4 to 5 stitches per inch is considered standard for worsted weight, and that's on size 7 to 9 needles. So there is like a range of what's considered like the, you know, ideal gauge for different weights of yarn. And finger, the gauge is 6.75 to 8. So there's almost like a 2-stitch difference. So yeah, I do think that you find the most variation. I would agree with that, between fingering and worsted weight. I will say though that this is one of the reasons why I'm really starting to get into using my reps per inch tool to figure out the reps per inch, because reps per inch isn't a perfect, it's not a perfect method for determining yarn weight, but I think it's more reliable than using a gauge, because there's just too much. There's too many variables with using a average of gauges, because all of us crocheters and knitters, our attention is so personal and individual to how you knit. Yep, bought a worsted weighted yarn for a colorwork sweater to pair with Cascade 220. Still beautiful, but I noticed the difference immediately. Yeah, you do. And, you know, I think some manufacturers do a better job than others. And I mean, some of this too is really being able to look at the ball band information. I know I was in a Facebook group and I was helping someone out. They were having a hard time hitting gauge for a pattern they were working on, and she was doing the things you're supposed to do, you know, going up the needle size, going down the needle size. She could not hit it. It made no sense, and we were kind of working it out together. And I asked her, I was like, what yarn are you using and what yarn is recommended in the pattern? And when we compared those two, and we compared the gauge on the ball band of those two yarns, we realized that the yarn in the pattern was a slightly heavier worsted weighted yarn than the one she was trying to use, and that she needed to try to use a different yarn. And that's what it came down to. You know, it's just sometimes you have to just use a different yarn, because the one you're trying to substitute with is just, the weight is too different from the one that the pattern was designed with. Yeah. Yes, I do. Thank you. Oh, by the way, before I forget, give this video a thumbs up. I have to start remembering to say those things. Good YouTubers remember to do their plugs. So yeah, I think, you know, I wish more yarn. So yeah, stop, think, use your words. Sometimes my brain and my mouth aren't in sync. What I wish is that yarn companies would use WPI more, at least add that to their ball band because, again, reps per inch isn't perfect. Using reps per inch, you have to be careful that you are not, when you do the reps per inch, making sure that you're not holding the yarn too tight or scrunching the strands together too closely. So it's not a perfect way to measure yarn, but there is no one perfect way to figure out yarn weight, as I'm learning. But I feel like it's more accurate than gauge. And there are yarns, as I was talking with this with actually on Twitter, Eating Cottage Yarns, which is a kind of independent yarn spinning company in England. We were chatting about this on Twitter, and she was saying that, you know, if you get fuzzy yarns, the reps per inch may not be as accurate. But yeah, it was really interesting conversation though on Twitter, because there was all of us from around the world. There was a woman in Germany, there was a woman in Australia. We were all talking about yarn weights and how different countries rate and figure out their yarn weights. It was a really fun conversation. Twitter can sometimes just be a fun conversation. Sometimes. Let's see. She has links to Bear and Char Designs. Sometimes I'll knit a different size to get a fabric I like. Yeah. I mean, and that's what you do. And one of the things about designing your own patterns is, you know, the ball band information, it kind of gives you an idea of what the fabric will end up like, but you still have to bring your own judgment in terms of what you want that fabric to be. Sometimes you want something that's looser. Sometimes you want something that's tighter. I mean, that's part of the design process. And even for knitters following a pattern, that is a decision you can make for yourself. You might really like the look of a pattern, but be like, but the fabric is too stiff, I want it to be looser, and decide, if you have the knowledge to do it, to knit at a different gauge and, you know, do the math to figure out how to still get all the sizing to work. Now, that's leveling up your knitting skills. I mean, that's a definite level up. And there are people who, instead of trying to change their needle size to hit gauge, they'll knit the gauge swatch. If they're happy with the fabric, regardless of what the gauge is, they will go ahead and knit the project to that gauge. And do that math, because there are ways of doing it. And like I said, that's leveling up. That's leveling up your yarn skills right there, because now you're getting into yarn math, which I enjoy because I'm a geek. I am a nerd. I actually like doing my yarn math. It's the only time I love doing math is when it's yarn math. Sometimes I'll knit. Bear. That extra bit of info seems like a good idea to include, especially now that I understand it better. Thank you. Oh, thank you. I'm glad I was able to help. You know, thinking in terms of reps per inch is new for me. And the way I even started getting into it was I bought some souvenir yarn. I did it. My husband and I went to Napa. Sounds so fancy. We went to Napa one Thanksgiving. It's not. Napa is actually way chill. If you've never been to Napa Valley in Northern California, I do enjoy wine. Before you go to Napa, you think it's going to be really pretentious and snooty, and then when you get to Napa, you realize, no, Napa Valley is really chill and laid back. And there was a yarn store in downtown Napa, and I bought this yarn that was spun by a local spinner with local animals, and it was really pretty colors. I still need to figure out a project for it, but this was souvenir yarn I bought for myself, and there was no yarn weight on the ball band. And I was like, well, I think it's this. I don't know. And that's why I bought my reps per inch tool. It's like, I got to figure out what this weight of yarn is so I can even start beginning to think what I could do with it. So, oh my God, the coffee is so good this morning. My husband makes coffee, and he's he's kind of a coffee snob, and I am the beneficiary of his coffee snobbiness. Okay, so I mentioned Twitter. Who wants to hear about the craziness that happened earlier this week? I already know that some of you do. So let's get into that. I just need to get to the proper... All right, so with the website that we are not mentioning, because I think we're all a little tired of talking about it, even though it's still important. There's just nothing new to talk about in terms of Ravelry. But with the stuff that's gone on with Ravelry, people have definitely seen an opportunity, a window to create new environments for knitters to find each other online. One of them was from a woman in Italy named Elisabetta Carrara. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. And she tweeted out on August 4th this. Whoops, wrong one. Well, I skipped ahead. Let's see. I screwed up the narration. I gave away, what the heck? All right. Well, I gave away the whole story. I had the whole thing planned. Did I just mislabel something? Or is everything? Okay. Anyway, let me get back to my webcam. Anyway, Elisabetta, she tweeted out late July, I think, asking if they would be, if people in the yarn community would be interested in a Ravelry-like place if it had better policies. And of course, people said yes. And I think, understandably, in light of what was going on at the time, a lot of people assumed those better policies would be around accessibility and whatnot. Oh, no, 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 no. No, no, no. No, no. Let's see if I can find it. So, yarn room map. She had a yarn room map. So, she put out another tweet about kind of a roadmap to developing this website. There were some designers who were like offering to help beta test this. And this was one of a couple different things that have popped up. The other one that's on Instagram is a group calling themselves Fiber Club that is working on a alternative to Ravelry. But Elisabetta, she put this up last weekend. Let me be clear. This site is for designers and makers. My aim is to build something allowing people to meet each other on a common ground. Patterns are that common ground. Patterns are written in a language every designer and maker understands. So it seems like not a terrible thing to say, but immediately some very smart people, kind of a flag went up for them, and they tweeted back to her asking, well, what are your policies going to be in terms of harassment and discrimination? And her response was, sorry, I gotta like switch things around. I had all of this, believe it or not, so nicely organized. So this was her response to people asking what her harassment policy would be, which is, let me ask you something. What has selling, distributing patterns to do with politics, religion, personal views, takes on various aspects of life? Nothing. I am starting with no forum and no private messages aside from that needed for designers, customers, relationship. Which, okay, that sounds okay in theory. That, you know, patterns aren't political, except when patterns are political. Because let's face it, something we've definitely learned over the last year or so is there are patterns that are political. The Women's March Pussy Hat, that was a political pattern. There have been issues on various Facebook groups and other social media platforms of people sharing their knitted items of a doll called a gollywog, which is a racist representation of Black people. And that's racist, and people take umbrage with that, understandably, and that's political. You're now getting into areas that we call political, even though I don't think racism is really political because, you know, I'm Jewish. right? My well-being of being Jewish is not a matter of politics. It's a matter of my well-being as a Jewish person. Um, and somebody brought up with Elizabetta, it's like, wait a minute. I live in a country where Nazi symbols are outlawed. Are you going to allow people to put up patterns that would have like Nazi swastikas? And that is when Elizabetta put up the this tweet of Nazis do exist, let's face it. And being humans, they have the same right to space as non-Nazis. Banning a Nazi product means that inclusive is such only for certain people and sometimes based on fashion mood. I can see what your point is. Can you see mine? If you ever want to destroy your potential business and brand in about 5 seconds, tweet that out to the world. I mean, it was nuts. And that was just one tweet. This conversation continued all day long as she was debating with people about the ethics and appropriateness and inclusivity of allowing Nazis to utilize your sales platform to sell Nazi paraphernalia. I mean, it was nuts. Their designs, fashion. Yeah. Like, if I don't allow Nazis, then inclusivity is just a passing fashion or mood. I was like, what are you talking about? And, you know, there is, I don't have the screenshot of this, but there is like the paradox of tolerance, which is like, you can argue that intolerance of intolerance is intolerant. But basically, there's this idea that the paradox of intolerance is in order to have a tolerant society, you have to be intolerant to intolerance. Like, you can't make space for prejudice and bigotry if you want to have a tolerant and inclusive society. Yeah, so that's what happened. And this led to a really interesting moment for me on Twitter. And this went on quite a bit. It was kind of nuts. She started making analogies to going to the mall. It's like, look, you go to the mall and you buy your things and you leave. And if somebody's at the mall selling some like Nazi paraphernalia, so what? It's not political. And we're like, you're not going to have a store existing in a mall that has Nazi paraphernalia in it. I mean, it was just... But I think one of the things that came of all this was, first of all, for the Fiber Indie list, I did make it clear that any designer who gets themselves involved with the yarn room is not welcome on my list. That is not in line with my values. But it did bring up a thing, which is with the controversies around Ravelry and people sort of entering the breach, the void, because a space has opened up for alternatives and Ravelry has had such a monopoly on the fiber community space. It's like, well, what are the intentions of these new players on the field? And our responsibility as makers and users of these sites to kind of be aware of what people's agendas are when they're creating these alternatives. And I think it was an important point, and I think it was a good reminder to a lot of people to be like, okay, we can't assume that everybody who is, I hate to say taking advantage because that's a negative connotation, but certainly, you know, taking this opportunity to create alternatives, that not everybody is going to necessarily have the best or good intentions or ideas, but it was amazing. Like, it was like, wow, you just destroyed your entire business plan in like 5 seconds. Because like, there's like, no. I mean, if your goal is to sell to Nazis, then I guess you've done yourself a favor, but I don't think that's what you want your brand associated with. So that was the crazy thing that happened on Twitter this week. Oh my gosh. We're just running through everything I thought of talking about. Do you guys have any questions for me this week? Any comments? Anything? So tomorrow, well, should be tomorrow. Will definitely be by Tuesday. I will have my new video up. My next bear in chart, just looked her up on Instagram. She has 4 followers and following 11 people. I think we can say effectively her site is dead. Yeah, her site is dead. I agree. Like, she destroyed that business. I was like, it's a case study on how not to build a brand. And there are some mutual follows on Twitter I had who were offering to help beta test. And as soon as that tweet went out, they're like, I'm out. I'm out forever. Like, there's no reeling that back. Even an apology. Like, not that she was unapologetic in her stance, that eventually she got to a place where it's like, well, if it's not legal to sell patterns with Nazi symbols on it, then I can't sell it anyway. So I wouldn't have it on my platform. We're like, yeah, but the problem is you now have already admitted that if it wasn't illegal, you would allow it. And that says something, doesn't it? So, Bear, you never have to apologize to me about typos. Never, ever. Because let me tell you, I am the queen of typos. Oh my gosh. I'm terrible about it. I admit, I can proofread if I sit down and take the time to do it. But a lot of times I don't take that moment to proofread and typos ensue. Also, autocorrect is the bane of my existence. Oh my God. I just sit there with autocorrect. I'm like, who programmed you? Like, how did you interpret what I typed with a couple of misplaced letters? How did you get to this? It doesn't make, like, this doesn't even make any sense. They can do predictive typing now, right? Which is not terrible, but they still can't figure out how to make autocorrect better. Like, it's just terrible. Autocorrect is the worst. But I still use it. I don't turn it off either. Okay, so this week's video. I did a video about this. Oh. If you have signed up for my newsletter, try again, then you are going to be very familiar. Let me I gotta get my camera. There we go. You'll be very familiar with this pattern. I make this all the time. This is a dishcloth pattern. This is the pattern that got me into knitting in the first place. Because my grandmother, this is all I ever saw her knit. My grandmother who knitted, I had a granny who crocheted and my grandmother knitted. And this is all I ever saw my grandmother knitting. Well, she didn't make it multicolored. She would do it just in solid colors. But anyway, the free pattern that comes with signing up my newsletter is actually this dishcloth. And the way I do this is I make this seamless by grafting together the two ends, because this is knitted flat and around using short rows. And then I graft the two ends together. So my video this week is about grafting. And we'll see if I stick with this title. But I thought I would call it Knitting in the Wild because it's a real life knitting situation. I don't know. Maybe that's cheesy. You tell me. But yeah, so it's me grafting this and kind of going through how I work out grafting situations, because yes, you can memorize Kitchener stitch, but I don't memorize Kitchener stitch. But what I have memorized are rules for myself on how to figure out any grafting situation. So I kind of talk about that. That's what I'm talking about in this video. It should be going up tomorrow, definitely by Tuesday. I'm almost done with the edit. I got the rough cut done. I just need to finish editing the video, which involves like doing the titles and the music and getting it trimmed down a bit more and making sure that what I'm saying actually makes sense. Bear crochet, yay! I tried starting it. I am sad to admit that I am such a beginner that I didn't understand how to get past the second row. Oh, really? With German double stitch? Well, I can show you right now. let me see. I have needles. I happen to have cloth. I will cast on right now, and we'll see if I can get to the German double stitch before time runs out. And by the way, you don't have to use German double stitch with the pattern. That's what I like to use, but you can use any short row technique, or you can use no short row technique. My grandmother never used short row techniques. It's short row, but she never used anything to close the gap. She just turned the work and knit back, and when you do that, you get holes, little lacy holes in the dishcloth, which is decorative and pretty as well. So you don't have to do German double stitch by any stretch of the imagination, but I like using German double stitch, and I thought it would be like a way for people to practice it and learn it if they want. But let me bring up my overhead cam, and I will do the Judy's Magic Cast On. This is how I get started with this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You know what? Now 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So Judy's Magic Cast On is normally used for starting toe up socks, but you can actually use it as just a provisional cast on. And it's a really cool way to do a provisional cast on because you end up with an equal number of loops on both sides of your work. Judy's Magic Cast On is actually one of my favorite cast ons. I should do a video on all the different ways that I've used it because it's more versatile than I think people realize. Yay. Wow, thank you, Bear and Char. It's good to learn for when you graduate to sweaters. It is. Okay, so when I do this, I actually use a circular needle like this to do this dishcloth. And the way I do this is, first of all, I do the Judy's Magic Cast On and I turn it over. Normally with Judy's Magic Cast On, you want this side showing, right? So that the purl bumps are in the back of the work, but this is a garter stitch project. So I actually start with the purl bumps here showing. And then I just pull this needle out. And what's going to happen are these provisional stitches here just hang out on this back cable as I work. And eventually, as I make more wedges of the dishcloth, it comes around and you get these little like mouse ears that's doing it this way. It's hard to see because I'm so zoomed in with my camera, which is like focusing like crazy. Let me pop out a little bit. There we go. So let's see. But yeah, but again, you can use any short row technique you want. Actually, a video I want to do is about short row techniques and how easily interchangeable they are because they are actually all doing the same thing. So I'm knitting across and you just knit to one stitch before the end. So here I've knitted, actually this is the first row, so I knit all the way across, sorry. Now I'm ready to get going. Okay, so you cast on, you knit all the way across for your first row, and then you knit 1, 2, 3, yarn over. This is for a picot edge. If you want a straight edge, you don't have to do the picot. There's a lot of ways you can do this dishcloth. 1, 2, 3, yarn over 1, 2. All right, so I'm going to knit to one stitch before the end. Getting my yarn. One stitch before the end. It's so funny. I always have this ball of yarn sitting here at the table for some reason. Now I know why. Okay, so I'm stitching. I work to one stitch before the end, and this is where you can do or not do a short row technique to close up the gap. But what you do with German double stitch is it's what I call a work and turn method. So in wrap and turn, right, you bring the yarn forward, you slip the stitch, you bring the yarn back, and then take that stitch and put it back on your needle. And now you have this little loop of yarn hanging out here on this stitch that you then work later. In German double stitch, you're also leaving a wrap behind, but instead of wrapping it around the stitch, you are actually working into the stitch. So you work into the stitch, then you turn the needles, okay? You leave this yarn in front and you slip that stitch you just worked back onto your right needle, and then you take the yarn and you pull it over top of the needle, and that capsizes the stitch. And that's what the German double stitch is taking that knit stitch on your right needle, taking your yarn, pulling it over the needle instead of in between the needle, and capsizing the stitch, okay? And now we're gonna just work our way back. Now, normally I would do a whole series of these, but I will just go ahead and show you. Bear. Oh, I get it now. Yeah. So it's really, normally when we do that, beginning knitters especially, will capsize that stitch by accident all the time. And it's because you're pulling the yarn over the needle when you turn the work. And this one. And in German double stitch, you're actually taking what is usually a mistake, which is capsizing that stitch, and you're using it for a functional purpose, which I think is one of the cool things, life lessons in knitting, which is something that is unintentional in situations can be a mistake, but if it's done with intentionality and purpose, it's not a mistake any longer. So anyway, life lessons from knitting. But yeah, German double stitch is one of, that's what, maybe I'll rank them. I've been noodling around in my head about doing a video comparing different short row techniques, and I was thinking about doing it in kind of the format of Knitting Secrets Revealed, because the truth is, structurally, all these different short row techniques, German double stitch, wrap and turn, Japanese short rows, yarn over short rows, whatever one you're talking about, we think of them as different techniques, but functionally they are actually all doing the same thing. They're just using different methods to do it, if that makes sense. It's kind of like English versus continental knitting. English versus continental knitting. You're doing the same thing, right? You're pulling loops of yarn through each other to create interconnected loops, but you're just utilizing different methods to achieve the same ends. So, yeah. And I think German double stitch is one of those things that's a little easier to understand seeing it than writing it out, because, yeah. So I'm going to just knit, and I'll show you what it looks like when you work the German double stitch as well. So I'm just working here. Let me put back my overhead camera. Working here across. I'm back here to the German double stitch, right? And let me zoom in so you can really see what's going on. By the way, just heard my husband and my daughter are home, so you might hear my daughter in the background. Like her mom, she's loud. So this is the German double stitch, and it looks like you have two legs here, right? And you knit these two legs together as though they're one. But sometimes it can be a little tricky to understand where to put your needle. And I don't know if you can see it, but if you turn the needle over, there's this bar right there underneath the needle. And that's what you're going to slip, and that's the hole. And that's what you're going to slip your needle through, like that. And then work them together. So it's like a knit two together. And that works the stitch and the wrap together. So there's my quick little 5-minute demo of the German double stitch. What I love about the German double stitch is how tidy the wraps are when you work them. Like here, I'm going to bring my overhead camera back. If you look really closely, let's see, where can I find them? Oh, I have to look on this side. Because when you do this multicolored, your wraps end up on the right side of the work. But if you just look at this, you're not going to notice where those wrapped short row stitches are. But they're right here. You can feel them because it's thicker. But they're tiny, 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 tiny. So when you do German double stitch, you get very small, discrete wraps of yarn. And I love that. I find when I use, I personally find that when I use wrap and turn or even Japanese short rows, that I just end up with these big loops of wraps that are just really apparent, and I don't like it. Even if it's hidden away. Like, I love doing the short row heel. In fact, I have a video on doing the boomerang and yo-yo short row heel techniques, which aren't as commonly demonstrated with short row heels and socks. But I mean, what does it matter, right, for a short row heel if you have like obvious wraps? Because it's on the inside of the sock. No one's gonna see it. But it bugs me. It bugs me. So I don't like it. So let's see. All right. Oh, wow. It's almost noon. I didn't realize how late it had gotten into the live stream. So we don't have a lot more time left. Any other questions before we wrap things up for today? Like I said, probably tomorrow, sometime tomorrow, but definitely by Tuesday, I will have the video up where I talk about where I demonstrate grafting this dishcloth together, and kind of take you through my thought process of how I figure out grafting situations. So that should be hopefully an informative video. So that's next week. The week after is probably when I will have the Addi Flexi Flip review up. And hopefully within the next month, I should have the acrylic yarn review up as well. That one, I just have to sit down and do swatches for the rest of the yarns that I'm testing out. I'm testing out, what am I testing out? I'm going to do Karen's Simply Soft. I have the Lion Brands Simple Stitch. I'm doing the Joann's Big Twist, and I'm going to look at the Red Heart Super Saver and see if I've been wrong about Red Heart Super Saver all these years. So that, I'm actually really looking forward to that video. And so yeah, that's some of the things I've got planned coming up. The Indy fiber list, the fiber Indy list. I should remember what I call it. The fiber Indy list. It is up. It is fully organized, and the formatting is all sorted out. I'm very excited about that. What I end up having, I have over 50 designers now up on the fiber Indy list, and it had gotten so big I couldn't have it on just one page of my website. So I now have knitting and crochet on their own subpages, and I got a FAQ written up on that, and I have some other ideas to try to make it, you know, as useful a resource as possible for people who are looking to buy patterns in other places than Ravelry. And actually, speaking of that, keep an eye on my blog. I have a blog post coming up about all the different sort of e-commerce sites that you see on the fiber, that are linked to on the fiber Indy list. So that's what's going on there. I think that's everything. I think that's everything going on with me, Carrie CraftGeek, right now. All right, so let's see. Can I get through the end spiel? Let's get through the end spiel. We can do this. We can do this. All right, so if you have not already, make sure, please, to give this video a thumbs up. Giving thumbs ups, sharing stuff for my videos. It does let YouTube know I am a channel worth checking out, and I can grow my channel. I am right now up to 190 subscribers. Yay! So that's very exciting for me. Anyway, So please like this video, and if you have not already, you guys probably have been, but if you are not already, make sure that you subscribe and hit the notification bell. Subscribing to my channel will make sure that new videos show up on your YouTube feed, but hitting the notification bell will give you email alerts when I do upload new videos or I set up for a live stream. If you want your personalized invitation from me for a live stream, sign up for my newsletter. Yes, gonna plug that newsletter. Because I do send out the alert usually on Saturdays that live stream is happening, and I talk about topics that I'll cover or planning to cover in that email out to everybody. You don't get that through the YouTube notification. No, no, no. You only get that with the personalized email from me, Carrie, CraftGeek. Thank you, B. Let's see. What else? And if you have not already, please follow me on social media. You can find all my social media down below. I am trying to blog more consistently than I have in the past, so keep an eye out on my blog. And I think I hit everything. I think I hit all the plugs. Did I? I think I did. So I hope that you had a wonderful time during Knit Tea Live, and I hope you have the wonderful rest of your weekend, and the week ahead is a good one for you. As always, happy health and happy knitting. Bye.